When did you lose your childhood innocence? When I was in about 1st or 2nd grade, I was an imaginative kid. My grade school was in front of a big wooded area in suburbia. At recess, I started telling my friend about the man who lived in the woods. Things like see the tree stump? That's his stove. And that fallen over tree? That's where he set up his house. Similar thing to looking at the clouds and seeing dragons. In my head he was a Rip Van Winkle type of character. Pretty soon I had a bunch of friends who'd come and listen while I talked about man in the woods. This ended badly when one of the kids mentioned this to a teacher and I ended up in several hours of interviews with the principal, teachers, and guidance counselors over whether there was a child molester hiding in the woods and whether I had been touched by him. I had never heard of most of the things they were talking about. I kept saying it was just a game I made up, but they couldn't believe a kid would bother doing that purely for fun. Pretty much killed the innocence right there. The man who lived in the woods. In my head he was a Rip Van Winkle type of character. I still live in the woods. I can't recall a specific moment, but the worst feeling is when you revisit a place that you have not seen since childhood and it is smaller and less impressive than you remember. I think the biggest tragedy of growing up is that simple things no longer give me a sense of awe and fascination. I guess this qualifies. I was about 15 feet away from a motorcycle crash that killed 2 people when I had just turned 14. This was the summer before high school and varsity tennis. Spent the summer practicing. Me and about 3 other incoming freshmen picked to make varsity were practicing on the court right next to an interstate. RT 11. A teenager who had fallen asleep at the wheel. It was 3 p.m. Crossed into the oncoming lane of traffic, hitting a motorcycle carrying a man and his wife. There weren't any other cars around at the time, so the 4 of us ran across the interstate to a florist to have 911 dialed. My friend and I had both taken CPR and first aid training and foolishly thought we could help. I ended up puking within 30 seconds of stumbling onto one of the rider's boots that had their foot still inside of it. It also didn't help when my friend pointed out that one of the helmets among the wreckage still had the head inside. When I was 11, my dad shot my dog in the head in our backyard while I was at school. My dad is a really fricked up guy. So anyway, that afternoon as I was walking home from the bus stop, dad drove up and got me, which was weird. Dad was drunk. When we got home, discovered that the dog was gone. He told me Rusty had run away. I freaked out, ran barefoot through the backyard, and through Rusty's brains, grabbed a leash, and went to search for my dog. Hours later my ma found me walking up the street, sobbing and calling for Rusty. My feet were sore and bloody. By then I was suspicious that dad'd done something. I was furious. I took him out to the backyard, still oblivious to the brains everywhere, and still barefoot, and yelled, "What the frick did you do to my dog?" He just kind of smirked, told me it would be okay, and went back inside. Later my mom sent me up to bed. Dad was still drunk. My sister was already asleep in her room. I lay there furious and afraid for my poor Rusty. Unbeknownst to me, as I lay awake in bed, my ma and dad were having an epic power struggle downstairs, in which my dad produced another gun after confessing that he'd killed the dog. When I heard a commotion, I ran downstairs. Mum was in the kitchen, and she shouted, "Margot, grab your sister and run. Grandma will pick you up." And so I did. I got my 8-year-old sister out of bed, and we ran down the street. We were barefoot, and I can remember how my own feet sounded on the asphalt. I remember telling my sister to run faster. I don't think of that day as the day I lost my childlike innocence that had been worn away by years of my father's total douchebaggery, but rather as the day I became an adult. We were whisked away to my aunt's house later that night. I'd finally been told what had happened. As my uncle and grandma got my sister all set up, my aunt took me into her bedroom and handed me a little red box. I opened it, and she asked, "You know how to shoot?" Yes, I knew how to shoot. My dad had taught me. "Good, you protect them if you have to. And don't worry, my ma survived." Right up until the last sentence I was like, nope, 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 nope. I was so scared. When I was sexually molested at 6-7 by our babysitter, I have only told 3 people in my life. Really can't believe anyone read this and cared enough to send me some encouragement. I was waiting for the smart but karma W remarks and was pleasantly surprised. Thanks again, Reddit. I was 13 and I had a job. My bank account tipped over the $1,000 mark for the first time and I was beaming with pride holding my balance book, thinking of all the things I could buy. My dad looked over my shoulder and took my book and said, "Son, I think it's about time you started saving for your education." He wiped my account clean. It was in trust, and put it into RESPs. I was so bitter for that. He probably did that another 5 times over the next 3 years and I hated him for it. Until I was able to pay cash for my first year uni. That was my real first lesson in planning ahead. When I found P on the computer my grandfather gave me 2 days earlier, I was 12. I literally had a "I'm 12 and what is this" moment. I started independently looking at P at around 12. When my mom was in the next room holding a 9mm to her head, with my stepdad egging her on to pull the trigger because her son, me, doesn't love her. I opened that door as a 9-year-old kid, called him a butthole, and told her I loved her. Wow, that's really brave for a 9-year-old. As a child I was kind of a loner. Had a few friends here and there but didn't really get along with most of my elementary classmates well. I liked nerdy things like cards and video games and stuff, and how I loved my Legos. Because of this I was outrageously close to my grandfather. He was an amazing man, had intelligence, charisma, charm, and a very powerful demeanor which I really looked up to. My parents both worked very late jobs, so instead of staying at the empty school till 6:30 at night, my grandfather would pick me up from school 3 times a week and take me to the local park and 7-Eleven for a Slurpee. In 4th grade I got picked up after school like any other day. I was beaming with excitement to see my grandpa and go to the park with him. I'd been waiting all day and was bragging to my friends that I got to play with him so much. I ran out to his car to find my own dad was picking me up that day. Rather unusual, but I thought nothing of it. When I got to my grandpa's house, there were about 10 people there, all crying and trying to hide themselves from me. My grandma pulled me aside and while sitting me on her lap, leaned in to whisper to me ever so casually, "Your grandfather has died, my son." The words meant absolutely nothing to me. In one sentence she completely split my insides in half. I could barely breathe, much less respond to what she was saying to me. I stared, wide-eyed, at the wall for about 10 minutes. I silently snuck out of the living room and made my way upstairs to his bedroom. I was terrified to let anyone see me trembling. I remember sitting in his bedroom where he had hooked up an original NES for me. He and I would play video games all the time, way past my bedtime. I sat there replaying the same level of Mario over and over while I cried the entire night. That day I lost both my grandpa and my first true best friend. I was about 9 and I went to a Catholic school where everyone had perfect 2-parent households with stay-at-home moms who always made perfect lunches. One day, we had a muffins for Mom's Day where you'd bring your mom to school with you and eat muffins. I brought my mom and we ate muffins. The next was donuts for dads. I was the only kid sitting alone. No one talked to me during the festivities. I didn't even get a donut because I had failed to bring my dad with me. There were 2 extra donuts. I remember it was a pink one with rainbow sprinkles and a chocolate. The teacher gave them to another kid in the class. I was thinking, those are my donuts for me and my dad. I left school that day and no one noticed. I think from then on I became really withdrawn. I rarely showed up to school. My mom worked. I had always been responsible for getting myself there, and things just generally sucked. I was picked on a lot for having an absent father. Wow. Worst teacher ever. I think it was the summer before the start of my senior year of high school. I knew I'd probably be working the following summers through college, so I took a moment to reflect on what was probably my last day of summer until retirement. I watched the sun set. Not quite childhood but a huge change for me. Getting off of the bus after the senior party, I knew many of those people I would never see again. As I was driving away from the school I knew I would likely never have occasion to come to that place again, and now I live right next door to it, lol. When I was 6 I woke up at 4 in the morning to find my mom on the phone crying and my dad on the floor having a heart attack. Most of that night was a blur but I do remember waking up later that day to the whole family being at my house and my dad was noticeably absent. Was never really the same after that day. Been there several times myself. Started when I was 8 and watched the paramedics working on my dad. to being 17 and driving him to the ER, to 21 and having him beg me to help him while he was on a ventilator, to him dying alone in a hospital room 2 hours from home. These are just a few of the many heart-related episodes I witnessed growing up. Hugs to you. Watched a man who drowned get pulled out of the lake where we were swimming. I was about 11 and my friend and I were rowing out in our little inflatable boat over to all the commotion, thinking someone had a huge fish and needed some help. Talk about disappointment. My mother still won't allow Rainbow Chips Ahoy into the house. I'm 25 and live 8 hours away from home. To put this into context, because I threw the most epic fit when I found out there wasn't a party in every box. I just wanted to party. My dad showed me a sketch of his idea for an invention for air conditioning that needs no energy input. I told him about the first law of thermodynamics. I was 8. He turned redneck dad on me. I'd really like to hear how he thought it would work. When my parents split up, I was 11. Before then, the idea that moms and dads could even do that never entered my mind. After I understood they were only human and sometimes had conflicting needs, I grew up really fast, especially when my mom started dating again. Same here. I was a little older, 13, but I can remember the exact moment they told us. I was at the kitchen table, and I remember my 2 younger sisters launching into crying while I sat there feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. That realization you mentioned when you find out that your parents and life are not in fact perfect is a B. A few of us were over at a friend's house. I was 13 at the time. He was an only child of a single mom. She left to go to work, and shortly after she was gone, one of our friends is like, "Is she gone for sure?" After getting a confirmation that the coast was clear, he pulls this VHS tape out of his backpack while giggling and hands it to the friend whose house we were at. He pops it in the player, and seconds later this full-on hardcore P scene is playing on the TV set. I was literally dumbfounded, as I had lived a pretty sheltered childhood, and now there I was staring at this close-up shot of 2 people freaking. My other friends were laughing awkwardly, and I just sat there in shock, unable to take my eyes off the screen. TLDR. Friend ambushed me with a porno. Furious masturbation took place later when I was alone. When I was a little girl in elementary school, I used to get bashed a lot by groups of older boys for being a loner and chubby. My mum always told me how we all go to a better place when we die. So one night when I was 9 I started thinking of all the different ways I could kill myself, like drowning myself in the bathtub or jumping in front of a bus. Every night has been the same from then on. I was somewhere between 3 and 4. My mother was cheating on my father and discussing this new man who was going to be my new dad. 9 months later, my brother was born and it was pretty obvious he wasn't related to my real dad. New dad never came up again. Nobody ever talked about why my brother looked so different from the rest of us. I was 7. My parents said I had a sister named Sarah Connor who was killed when I was younger. They made me watch The Terminator 15 minutes later. Marvelous. I can't wait till I have a child so I can pretend certain sci-fi films are actually factual documentaries. Darling, this is called Alien. This is why there are no more shuttle launches. When I was 12, sleeping on my aunt's hide bed, my uncle came in the house drunk, climbed in bed with me and started poking me in the back with his penis. I started crying and he kept telling me to be quiet. I would wake his kids. He left without doing anything because I was crying so loud. The next morning he was sitting in his usual chair reading the comics and laughing like nothing was out of the usual. I was heartbroken and ashamed. He had helped raise me. I never told anyone until I was an adult. He died a few years after that incident. His liver malfunctioned from all the alcohol and I was so happy. I'm also happy he died and I didn't even know the sick freak. I remember when I was 8 years old, I asked my dad what a condominium was, because I had seen the word on signs all around my neighborhood and on TV and whatnot. He thought I asked him what a condom was. Looking back, he manned up to the situation like a boss, but that still doesn't make my 8-year-old mind prepared for crap like that. Probably when I was 4 or 5 and my sister caught me dry humping a life-size tiger stuffed animal, the way I masturbated back then, except didn't know what it was or why I did it yet, and asked me in horror, "What are you doing?" I suddenly realized that if it feels good, you should not do it in front of other people, and that I should feel shame doing that where others may see me. A few days later, the leg of that stuffed animal fell off and all his bean stuffing came pouring out. Poor tiger. Cause of death, dry humping. Cause of death, dry humping. That's how I hope to go. I would have to say when I was in like 4th grade and it was Valentine's Day, everyone was giving each other the Bulls cardstock Valentines with maybe a lollipop taped to it if their parents spent the extra money. I bought a heartful candy for a girl I liked in the class, my first crush. She saw it was from me and gave me the patented "girl you look." I was later told she threw it away. Frick her. Shortly after getting AOL access, I learned of a special chat room called GIFs. Back in the days when you had to barter your way to pee. When a close friend of mine was abducted, attempted rape, and murdered when she tried to get away, I consider my old self as having been a naive child until that point, even though I was 21 when it happened. I am sorry to hear about that. Nobody deserves what happened to your friend. I understand where you're coming from though. When a buddy of mine passed from a tragedy when I was 20 years old, everything kind of hit me like a sack of bricks, like, holy crap, this could happen to me too. Crappy feeling knowing you've got no more innocence. Heard my dad fall down the stairs while he was carrying the Christmas presents to the tree when I was 7. Found out then and there that there is no such thing as Santa, Easter Bunny, etc. I got scared and thought you were going to end the story with, "and he broke his neck." I was 18 and it was the end of my first real relationship. I had never known pain like that and would never be the same. The heartbreak was so bad that I never thought I could be that close to someone again. Took years to get over. Been there. Feel your pain. As a kid I also was given a magic kit. My dad says I opened it as soon as I could, then came to him sobbing 10 minutes later because the wand didn't work. I also cried when I got the Jumanji board game and no crazy plants or animals jumped out of it after rolling the dice. Then on my 12th birthday, I burst into tears after waiting until 1 AM for an owl from Hogwarts. I was convinced I had to be a witch. I think by 14 I had realized crying wasn't going to open that portal to an alternate reality where my real king and queen fairy parents were. It's alright, my parents told me when I was 11, about 3 hours into a 12-hour car ride, that I hadn't gotten my Hogwarts letter because I was a squib, and my 5-year-old brother had already shown signs of magic and was going to be a wizard. I cried hysterically in a ball in the backseat for the remaining 9 hours of the car ride. In school I noticed that a lot of kids have birthdays in August and September, and then I did some math and figured out that it was approx. 9 months after Christmas vacations and New Year's Eve. My birthday is 9 months after my mom's birthday, which is Christmas Eve. Thanks. Sorry for crappy grammar. I'm kind of drunk. I doubt this will get read anyway, but here goes. I was raised in the suburbs until I was around 8, and my dad decided to up and leave, divorcing my mom cause he found some pretty blonde woman to frick. That wasn't what did it though. What did it was when my mom started to smoke crack. It's a bit of an eye-opener when you see one moment a stereotypical 90s home, and the next you're starving and living in a crack den. Kids in the neighborhood wouldn't hang out with me anymore. I was treated like a leper, and no one would tell me what was going on. I've had a pretty traumatic childhood, but I'm getting over it, one step at a time. This might get buried, but I'll share. A few years ago I had a crush on one of my teachers. I mean, I really thought she was pretty. Weird thing was she felt the same way about me, and things just sort of happened and I ended up losing my virginity to her. In hindsight was pretty weird cause she was significantly older than me. Really it might have turned out okay, except that we got caught making out at school by a student hall monitor of all things. My kinda strict Jewish parents were considering filing charges. My mom wanted my teacher thrown in jail. Anyways, my teacher really went psycho and decided to run away to Spain. Awesome freaking place. Being young and stupid, I really thought about going, and actually met her at the hotel before we were supposed to fly out of the country. Somehow the police found out about it though, and they showed up at the hotel to arrest her. Long story short, she wanted me to jump off the roof and die with her. I didn't, of course, but she did. She fell like 10 stories and died. I live in a quiet, Little, redneck, mountain town too, so this was huge news. I see what you did there. I was 7 and a friend of my parents offered to take me to see his horses. Instead he drove me down a dirt road near his house, parked and made me give him a hand job. TLDR. At 7 I learned what jerking off was. 7th and 8th grade, really, people started coming out, having sex, and I was in a lunch table where perverted jokes were the norm. Yeah, in 7th grade at basketball practice when one of my teammates told us all that this girl sucked his dong and her mom found out, I'd barely stumbled out of the batter's box, let alone made it to third base. When I accepted that not all creatures live forever, including those beloved pets that we've had for as long as we could remember. Probably when my dad and I went to pick up my best friend for baseball practice in 4th grade. He was hit by a truck when he was riding his bike minutes before we got there. I got in a fight in 7th grade that nearly left a kid dead. I went to a half black half white school and some black kid came up and started fricking with me because of the fact that I was white. When I finally took a swing at him, an all riot broke out in the courtyard. The kid who started it ended up with a hairline fracture like an inch above his left temple. I to this day do not know if I am the one who actually landed that hit or if it was someone else. Fortunately I was not charged with anything since it could not be proved who did anything. When Optimus Prime died in the original Transformers animated movie, walked in the theater a boy, saw him die, shed a tear, walked out a man. I salute you. I was on ecstasy outside a club and pretty drunk. I got separated from my friends and I find myself turning down the advances of some Middle Eastern guy who keeps asking me to come back to his apartment for wine. I told him I wasn't gay and he just replied desperately, no sex, just wine. I then realize he is holding his throbbing erection in the open air and has got this really pained expression on his face as if he's about to shoot his load all over me. I ran and was never innocent again. TLDR. Foreign guy nearly blew his load on me outside a club. August 92 September 1993. Left Chicago for the former Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Dad wanted me to go fight for the Serbs. I was 14. It started in 1st grade when I found out I was adopted and got made fun of for being Asian for the first time at school. It continued in 2nd grade when I found my dad's pea stash, a bunch of old Penthouse magazines stacked behind some random crap in the basement. I didn't believe in cooties anymore, but none of the girls in my class looked like those girls. It took off in 3rd grade when I applied a little bit of detective work to the discrepancies in Santa Claus handwriting each year. My dad wrote in all caps, and my mom wrote in cursive. When pressed, they admitted none of that crap existed. Any semblance of childhood innocence died in 8th grade, when my dad committed suicide after a messy divorce which resulted from the affairs he had had the past 9 years. Around that time I learned that there is no higher power and we live alone in an uncaring universe. I've been a bitter, sarcastic butthole since. I don't think I ever lost or had it, or at least, I don't remember it. I remember this intelligent conscious state only, no early childhood. I feel the same way. I assume I'm like this because I was the eldest and I really did look over my brother and sister. Still do. My mom likes to joke that I skipped the teenager stag of parental rebellion and pointless arguments, and was pretty self-reliant. It's just a different way of growing up. The first time I realized that not only was the advice my father was giving me wrong, it actually hurt me more than helped. I had a rough time growing up because the kids at school picked on me constantly. My dad advised me to beat them up, thinking what worked for him would work for me. And after all, my dad was the smartest guy ever. He couldn't be wrong. Well, I got suspended and the teasing became even worse. Turns out beating them up is bad advice to give to a tiny elementary school girl. It made me realize how culturally blind my dad was and to take all his future advice with several grains of salt. This is why I hate always hearing how Redditors think kids these days should just beat up their bullies. Maybe in some cases that works, but holy crap, even if you fight out of self-defense, you'll still get suspended. Not sure how much childhood innocence I've ever had. I tried to prove that Santa was my parents at the age of 7 with handwriting analysis. When my longtime high school girlfriend broke up with me right before the prom, then going to college alone, Went through some pretty bone-crushing depression but made it out a pretty mature guy. Probably when I watched the Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon. At the time, I was so freaking excited for new episodes of Ren and Stimpy, and then they butt fucked, which was a total curveball of what I was expecting. I knew it was going to be more mature, but I didn't know it was that adult head. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.